Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I'm joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and good news, they've greenlighted my remake of The Worrywart starring Robert Downey Jr.
Oh, perfect. Jason, I thought you were going to do a comedian and comedian or some sort of intro like that, because this movie is all about a comedian or a comedic performer, I guess you could say. We are here in our season on the films of 1969, and we're in our flop episode, which is The Comic, starring Dick Van Dyke as, I guess, not a stand-up comedian, but a vaudeville type comedian who becomes a silent movie star and then is sort of washed up. And this film charts his entire life and career, essentially. And it's directed and co-written by Carl Reiner, two comedy icons here teaming up for a movie that was a passion project, but their passions were not shared by the audiences of 1969, let's say.
It's just too bad that these guys never worked together on anything else and couldn't achieve great success together.
Right. Well, I think that is one of these things that, of course, they had achieved the great success collaborating on the Dick Van Dyke Show, the incredibly popular TV show. And while they were working on that, Dick Van Dyke expressed his admiration for silent era comedians like Buster Keaton and Laurel and Hardy. And Carl Reiner basically created this film as a vehicle for Dick Van Dyke to express his love for that era of comedy.
And that's probably the best stuff, is seeing Dick Van Dyke do those kind of silent era type film scenes in this. Although I will say the montage of it is more of like an entire chunk of the movie.
Yeah, it is long. And I think, well, we'll get to that. But part of the problem is the tension here between the different kinds of things that they're trying to do. And I think that is emblematic of it, is that the long sequence of these recreations of old silent comedies, on the one hand, is way too long as a segment of this narrative about this actor and his life. On the other hand, I at least found it to be the strongest element of the movie, that if it were longer, say the whole movie, I probably would have enjoyed it more. But when it's not the whole movie, it feels like it's too long.
When you had said that to me, it made me immediately think of Mel Brooks' silent movie, right? Like, why not just you have one of the greatest physical comedians of all time. You have one of the greatest comic minds of all time behind the camera. Just make a cool silent movie.
Right. I mean, and I think I actually have not seen that Mel Brooks movie, but I assume it's like most Mel Brooks movies, just nonstop jokes and parody and stuff like that. And it seems like that is not what they wanted to do. And that's part of the tension here too, is that they want to make a movie that's kind of serious, that's about this guy who is a jerk and he gets too into his own fame and he treats his wife poorly and he's an alcoholic and he ends up poor and unloved and all this serious stuff. But they also want it to be goofy fun and you laugh at Dick Van Dyke falling down.
Josh, you're confused. Carl Reiner did direct The Jerk, but that was Steve Martin.
Right. Yes. But I feel like Steve Martin's character in The Jerk is much less of a jerk than Dick Van Dyke's character in this film.
And that's what's hard to rectify here, right? Because Dick Van Dyke is like one of the most beloved and lovable personalities in the history of television and movies too, right? Before this, he had already done Mary Poppins and I think Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. He was already a huge Broadway star, winning a Tony. So like, you just want to love this guy, and it's you can't here, and that is ineffective.
Right. And I mean, I'm not like, I appreciate when actors like that who have that kind of lovable public image decide they want to play something darker if they can follow through with it. But the problem is, again, it's that tension, is that they want it to be dark, but they also want him to be lovable, and it doesn't really work both ways.
Yeah, they needed to go all in on it and really hit home that he was willing to destroy his entire life just to stay famous.
Yes. So, as is often the case with movies pre-1980s, I don't have any actual numbers on this. Wikipedia says it did poorly, quote, at the box office. And that was kind of enough for us to look at it. Dick Van Dyke also had reflected in interviews that audiences didn't connect with this film, despite the fact that he was proud of it. So I don't know exactly how big of a flop this movie was, but just considering the success of the Dick Van Dyke Show, as we mentioned, one of the biggest, most popular shows on TV, for him to follow that up with a good sized film and for that not to be a big hit, I think is something that would be considered a failure right there.
Right. But like we said, he's already, cemented his legacy. Not everything's going to hit. So this is that.
That is true. Yes. And as far as Carl Reiner goes, this was his second film as a director. He, of course, also started in TV in addition to the Dick Van Dyke Show. What is it, Your Show of Shows, and a long history of working as a writer and performer, but moved into film directing with Enter Laughing from 1967, which I think we had briefly talked about in our 1967 season as a possible first feature episode, but we did not end up doing that. And I have not seen that movie.
Me neither. You blew it.
All right. So not only audiences, but critics were not particularly into this film either. Roger Greenspun in the New York Times said, "The film is structured as a reminiscence from The Coffin of a rather bitter and futile life, played for laughs as if it were an extension of the Dick Van Dyke Show gone sour and very complicated. It isn't a good movie, but it is often an interesting one, and it is full of lovely people. And the whole film has been cast with care for detail down to the smallest part. Unfortunately, the parts rarely mesh. The film seems to have been badly cut. And careful detail is a minor virtue in the movies. About a fourth of the movie is given over to long segments of imitation silent comedies. Though clearly derivative, these segments are genuinely funny and sophisticated, and they are the reason enough for seeing the comic."
Right. As we mentioned, it's just too much of it or not enough of it, right? Like, because you're watching a movie and you're like, what is this? It's like 10 minutes of just scenes, right? Of different fake movies that he made. They're talking about the characters. I thought Mickey Rooney was great in this, but Michele Lee, who played the love interest, she wasn't bad. There just really wasn't much chemistry with her and Dick Van Dyke.
Right. And I think you have his history of working with someone like Mary Tyler Moore, where there is chemistry and someone who holds her own with him, who's just as charismatic and just as fun to watch as he is. Michele Lee, like you said, is fine here, but does not ever, you're never watching the movie thinking, oh, I'm fascinated to see what she does too. It's really the Dick Van Dyke Show, let's say.
Hey, why I oughta, I fell over the couch.
Yeah. But I agree with you though. Mickey Rooney was good. And Mickey Rooney, of course, worked during this silent era. He started his career in 1926 when he was 6 years old and worked steadily for 90 years. So an amazing career. But, he would have had, whereas Dick Van Dyke, it seems like he was sort of looking at this era thinking, oh, I wish I'd been around then, or I wish I'd been able to work with these people. Mickey Rooney really was around then and really could have worked with those people.
But not just that, he was like the biggest movie star in the world from 1939 to 1941. Box office receipts prove it, Josh.
Yes, indeed. So, I mean, that's, of course, a slightly later era than what we're showing here, but he began.
Right. Post-silent.
Right, exactly. So, Jack Goff in The Hollywood Reporter said, "The comic isn't likely to turn throngs of people away from the box office. It may turn a modest profit on its initial showings, but it will probably show its biggest return in general release. Producer-writers Carl Reiner and Aaron Rubin, with Reiner also directing and acting, have fashioned the script and film in much the same manner they've put their central character together. A touch of zaniness, a dab of seriousness, and fully incapable of taking itself seriously at any time. Their script, like the character, is utterly unable to completely carry through with a serious scene before becoming embarrassed at showing its inside and attempting a joke as cover."
Reiner played Dick Van Dyke's agent, and that scene is good, where they're in a restaurant and Reiner wants him to take this job and Van Dyke won't, and at the same time he's constantly on the phone and also yelling at the waiter Armand for not getting anything right.
Right. And I think that's a good scene too, because it shows that this could have been like a showbiz satire, right? that we still could have had kind of the general arc that this character goes on. But instead of playing this like maudlin note during these down moments, we could have turned it into this Hollywood satire, which certainly these guys would have plenty of knowledge about how to create. But other than that scene, I don't really feel like that ever comes across.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you could also, when they're on the Steve Allen show, like had that been kind of a little tonally different, you could have gone that way with it. But I see your point, Josh. This is why you're the film reviewer.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and that's Steve Allen shows up as himself, and he just kind of plays it straight as if he's really interviewing this guy. And there's a little bit where there's some sort of like hippie looking younger dude there next to Dick Van Dyke who's having some reactions, but you don't really get enough of him to have that. Like, do we want some sort of satire about the culture clash between these eras or whatever? It's not really there.
Right. It's unlike when David Letterman interviewed Whoopi Goldberg when she was coaching the New York Knicks as Eddie. Now that's a classic talk show.
I have not seen. Is that in the movie Eddie, or was that something that was on the David Letterman
No,
show?
it's in the movie. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sure he interviewed her. Well, in the movie.
But I was wondering if David Letterman had somehow like interviewed Whoopi Goldberg in character as Eddie on his show.
No. I mean, other than Sacha Baron Cohen, I don't see a lot of people doing that.
But. Right. But maybe she was a pioneer in that. Anyway, finally, Pauline Kael in The New Yorker, also not a fan. She said, "The life of a silent film comedian is a potentially great subject. But the comic, like Woody Allen's Take the Money and Run and other recent movies involving television performers and writers, is an emaciated little picture. As Billy Bright, Dick Van Dyke has the true manic feeling for the silent comedy routines. And Mickey Rooney, as his teammate Cockeye, creates a character out of almost nothing and lives it on the screen so convincingly that one fully expects to see him again after the movie is over. Yet they don't have the kind of beauty that the picture should be about. I don't think it's their fault. It's Reiner's. A man like Carl Reiner or Woody Allen spreads himself so thin, he may never discover his full self. There just isn't enough of him together at any time in any one place. Now that such men are making movies, they treat the movie audience like the television audience. Their movies are as thin as skits." And she spends most of that review complaining about television, which is amusing to read her, people like Carl Reiner and Woody Allen are dumbing down the culture kind of thing.
Right. Now, Reiner and Woody Allen, of course, in the legendary writer's room on your show of shows with some other stupid TV hack named Mel Brooks, right?
Right.
And these guys were doing basically 90 minutes a week. I think we talked about this once. Every week out of the year, there was no break. Maybe they did 39 weeks. I think they did the whole year, I remember correctly. And it was, these are geniuses. And I think they did realize their full selves, Josh.
Right. I mean, and obviously this is her writing in 1969. And Woody Allen, especially, of course, went on and left TV entirely, whereas Carl Reiner maybe went back and forth a bit. But I don't know if she changed her perspective. But it is just amusing to read a review that sounds like essentially the tone of a review that might be written now if somebody from TikTok made a movie.
Mm-hmm. Well, when we get to awesome movie year 2046 or something like that.
Right. And we'll have to reassess the entire career of Addison Rae or somebody like that.
Yeah. Mr. Beast, the silent comedian.
Yeah. Mr. Beast hasn't made a movie yet, but I'm sure he'll get there. So I don't believe any of us had seen or even necessarily heard of this film, right? Jason, had you heard of it? Were you familiar with it?
No. And I love movies about comedy, about stand-up comedy also. But this is, like you said, a little different. I didn't know it. Of course, I want to watch it. It's Carl Reiner. It's Dick Van Dyke. Come on, let's go. I watched it. It's not that good.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm glad that you watched it. So, yeah, I wasn't familiar with it either. And I mean, of course, figuring out this season sometimes, especially in these older years, this is one of the tougher categories for us to figure out, like, what's a failure, especially because these movies are often not remembered. And movies like this, where it is these huge talents and you think, oh, what happened? They made this movie and yet we don't hear about it anymore. And so it was interesting to discover the existence of this and to kind of check out what it would be like.
I had no doubts, Josh. You know why? Because nobody knows failure like you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's one of my areas of expertise. So, Dave, I assume you were not familiar with this one either?
Nope, had no idea. And I was very happy to go into this one. It seemed like it would be fun.
Yeah. Have you
You
watched?
liked it. Dave liked it more than us. I know that. So spoilers, guys.
Yeah. I let's temper that a little bit. I mean, I didn't love it, but it was good though. I liked it.
Yeah, Dave, have you watched a lot of silent comedies?
I haven't, no. But I mean, certainly that style, though, I always enjoy watching it, and I should watch more of it because I do like it when I see it.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like your kind of thing, the slapstick, and that sort of stuff. But it is something that, even though it is slapsticky, I think silent movies of any type have this reputation of being sort of difficult or highbrow or whatever. People don't go into them, and they don't realize that many of them involve pies in the face.
Absolutely.
So, and they're enjoyable. Jason, you've seen some silent comedy though, right?
Oh yeah, Josh, I've seen some silent comedy. Sorry, Mr. Erudite Film Professor.
No, I'm not. I just literally said it was the opposite of that.
Who is this Charles Chaplin you speak of, Josh?
Yeah.
Buster who? Harold what? Okay, Josh. Yeah, Josh.
And
yeah.
And have you did you not? I feel like you watched maybe some of these with your daughter. Is that right? Did you ever do
we
that?
watched by the way, sorry about that. That was a little aggressive there,
a little
Josh.
rude there. Channeling Billy Bright.
Scarlett, I showed Scarlett some of the Chaplin shorts. We haven't gotten to like the Gold Rush or City Lights yet. But
right, yeah.
She was interested in that stuff. But no, I've seen of course, a good amount of Chaplin, some Buster Keaton, not as much Harold Lloyd, Josh.
I like Harold Lloyd a lot. I mean, I still have seen only maybe 4 or 5 Harold Lloyd movies, but I always really enjoy them. I feel like he's underrated. But of course, Chaplin, Keaton, great. And this movie inspired most by, in terms of the life and career of Keaton, as well as Laurel and Hardy, I think are the main ones.
Right. I agree.
Yes. So anything else you want to say about the background of this film, Jason?
We're talking about Mickey Rooney as Cockeye, right? And it was fun reading about Mickey Rooney because, like, I found this like Laurence Olivier quote where he said, like, he's the best that's ever done this, right? And everyone is just like, Mickey Rooney is the best actor. He's the best at everything, right? And then Carl Reiner had said this with Cockeye. He tried to place his finger on Mickey Rooney's nose and told him to look at it, but Rooney couldn't move his eye. So Reiner said of Rooney, this man could do everything in show business, sing, dance, act, but he couldn't cross his eyes.
Right. And so the character who is cross-eyed, I think they use a prosthetic. So just like one of his eyes is constantly crossed and the other one looks normal. So I feel like even if you can cross your eyes, having to give an entire film performance while concentrating on deliberately crossing your eyes would be pretty difficult, I would imagine.
You'd get a headache.
Yeah.
Get a bad headache.
So the prosthetic was probably the right way to go. So we'll come back and talk more of our general thoughts on the comic. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1969, we are talking about it's
hard to say. Carl Reiner's film, The Comic, starring Dick Van Dyke and Mickey Rooney.
That is
directed by Carl Reiner,
right?
And co-written by Carl Reiner and Aaron Rubin,
and co-starring Carl Reiner as well.
There's a lot of Reiner in here. Finally, does this put the Reiner family above all other directors? Now that this Rob Reiner and
Jason? If we combine them together, maybe so. Because I guess we couldn't. I mean, they would still be ahead of like the Coppola family, right? Because we haven't, we haven't done a lot of. That's the only other one I can think of with the multi-generational filmmakers that might combine to be ahead. But I don't think we've done enough of those.
Cronenberg.
So. We did do two different Cronenbergs. Yeah.
Just wait until 1993 when I pick Fatal Instinct.
Yeah. Carl Reiner's other masterpiece.
Yeah.
I think I saw that one in the theater back in the day.
It rules.
So I guess for me, again, that sort of silent comedy pastiche was the best part. Jason, was that the best part to you, or what else did you like about it?
Yeah, that was the best part, but it was also just it was too much. Like when they did it, right? It just kept going and going, and you're like, what kind of structure is this? I think the other best part would be the build up to his fame, right? Like all the fun and game stuff of like when they're making movies together, and he's ascending, and then he's messing up, of course, with his lady, but he's also just as Mary, she's co-starring with him in all these movies, and that's probably the most fun stuff, when it's the two of them and Mickey Rooney, and we're just going with the flow, baby.
Yeah, I mean, and the weird thing also with that section of the fake silent movies is that it doesn't really come back. It's not like, if it were more interspersed throughout the movie, maybe I feel like it wouldn't feel like it was so extensive. If every so often we went back and we saw another little clip of a Billy Bright short, it might be, better integrated. But basically the movie just stops for 10 minutes or so, and we watch all these different segments of Billy Bright comedies. And then we don't really see any more of them until we see a bit at the very end of his sort of magnum opus, supposedly, which I guess is maybe equivalent to something like City Lights, called Forget Me Not. And we see a bit of that at the end of the movie when he's watching it on TV.
I love that scene. I think that scene is great. And had the movie like been as effective and built to that, you'd be like, wow, that's such a perfect ending for it would have like elevated the entire movie, but none of the movie could really live up to that. Because now he's this old, lonely man. And, we see he's doing like washing liquid, like detergent commercials now. And he's just trying to hold on. And then he's in his apartment alone. And what does he do? He watches his old movie when he was in the prime of his life, in the prime of his career. And it's like, at once, like he was triumphant and so sad. And I think that was a brilliant scene. It's just that it didn't emotionally invest me to get there.
Yeah, I think that's the problem, is that you want to have all that emotion in that scene. You want to feel sorry for him, and you want to feel the weight of all the like mistakes that he made in his life and the bad decisions. But all of that is presented so haphazardly and without really an emotional effect throughout the rest of the movie that it didn't have that impact, I think, that you want. And especially because that's the way the movie ends. We don't see, I mean, I guess maybe we're supposed to imagine that he dies in that moment just of heartbreak or something, but we don't specifically see his death, even though the movie is framed around his funeral. And so it needs to really have a major impact for that to be the end. And I feel like it didn't really do that. When it got to that point, I thought, oh, okay, I guess the movie's over. Like, I didn't even realize that was where we were.
That didn't bother me, because you could, interpret it as this is what he does every night, right? He tries to find an old movie of his and relive his glory days. So, or any night that it's on, he's going to, eat his dinner in front of the TV. So that didn't bother me. It was just that, like the review said, it was kind of just like all over the place structurally. And that didn't do the characters any favors. But again, like, we didn't see a lot from the characters either. Like, I think in the Pauline Kael review, she said like Mickey Rooney builds a character out of nothing. That shows you how good he is. Like, he's really got nothing except like, come on, Billy, let's get him, Billy. Come on, Billy, you can do it. Come on, Billy, right? And it's like, he's just a loyal sidekick. But wouldn't it have been great to give that character more depth and like, give him his, I've always been there for you and you've never kind of gotten my back type thing.
Right. And like, how did his career go? Right. He was also successful in the silent era. And then he's around still, but what is he doing? Did he get a job? Is he still working? Did he get to, like Mickey Rooney, reinvent himself numerous times? Is he on the sitcom playing the grandpa or something? We don't know. And also the idea too, at the beginning of the movie, we see Billy Bright show up for his first ever shoot, right? He's been this big vaudeville star and he's coming to Hollywood, and he shows up to appear in a movie, a comedy where Mickey Rooney, Cockeye, and his like partner, I forget, who also has a weird offensive name, they seem to be some sort of comedy duo who are like the stars of this short. And then Billy Bright comes in, upstages them, and becomes the star himself, and then eclipses them entirely. Like, you would think that there would be some sort of like, how did he feel about that being, overshadowed by this guy who then went on to become a huge star, and he ended up being the guy's sidekick.
And that's a fun scene where Dick Van Dyke's like this ice cream man on the beach, and I think it is Cockeye, right? He doesn't have a cone or something, so he makes Cockeye ball his hand up into a fist, and he just puts the ice cream right on top as if that's the cone. That was well done. Dick Van Dyke's physical comedy is excellent. We know that, and you see a lot of it here. But Josh, you just had me thinking like, hey, what if when we see Cockeye visit Billy in the hospital, he's, like a mattress salesman or something like that. And Billy's still talking about, this is just what I need to start my comeback. And, he's like, he's the one who has to say like, hey, it's over, man. You got to live in reality. There's more out there, and you got to pay your rent.
Right. And he doesn't do any of that. And you get the sense that he's maybe sitting around. I mean, we have the scene where he calls Billy in his apartment or whatever, and Billy's like, I'm always waiting around for you. And what he's waiting around to do is for them to just go sit in the park, right? And complain about stuff. And so you don't get that trajectory. I mean, the other thing is there's a period of like numerous decades in here that are just skipped over. We basically go from
that would have been interesting.
Yeah, we go from the end of the silent era, right? Because that scene that we were talking about with Carl Reiner as his agent is when sound is coming in and he's saying like, no, I won't do a sound movie. That's not going to work. Comedy isn't funny with sound or whatever. And so that's got to be 1930 maybe at the earliest, or at the latest, 1932 maybe. And then suddenly we leap ahead and we're basically in 1969 or close to it. So what was he doing in all that intervening time? Sitting in his apartment?
Yeah. I think according to the movie, he was drinking and philandering and ruining his life, right?
For 30 years.
But that's what I'm going to say. Like, you kind of bring up a good point there, because it's like, we know Keaton, as we've talked about, kind of worked as a technical coordinator to kind of build stunts out on movies. And we know Chaplin directed talkies. Like, wouldn't that been interesting to see him go in a different direction? There was a lot of, I say this a lot this season, a lot of meat on the bone, Josh.
Yeah, I think at one point he does say he was working as some sort of technical advisor, but he's very vague about it. And the way he says it makes
we don't see it either.
Right, we don't see it. And it also makes it sound like maybe he's lying. But yeah, the other thing too is it makes a big deal of how he started his own production company, right? And all of those little fake clips always say like Billy Bright Pictures presents. So did he own the rights to his movies? Maybe he got rich off of those. When it airs on TV, is he making money? I mean, it's trying to chart this whole sort of history of the movie business with this guy, and it leaves so much out. And what it leaves in is a lot of stuff that we just don't really care about. I mean, all this stuff about his relationship with his wife, played by Michele, and they eventually get divorced, and he's trying to have a relationship with his son, who he doesn't know, to the point where at one point he shows up when the son is like 4 or 5 years old and thinks some other kid is his son. And none of that stuff was affecting or interesting. And I mean, we have to talk about the insane scene where Dick Van Dyke plays his own son as a sort of like gay fashion designer.
Yeah, it's first let's take it back to like the kid, like, when they first have the son, Billy Jr., right? Like, he loves him. You can see he loves him. He's in the movies with him. They're doing all this stuff as a family. So like, like you're saying, he doesn't even recognize him. Like, did he just not care? Is his heart broken? How did that affect him? Right? You would think that he would, on the Steve Allen show, he says like, I had the choice of like making one person smile or making the world smile. And I chose making the world smile. Right. But it's like, we get that scene, but we don't get enough before there to kind of give us that. Like, that's a tough decision, you would think, right? Like, I'm going to go do my career instead of being a parent. Or it's a tough decision, and we need to see more from Mary to say like, hey, you've abandoned your child. You know what I mean? Like, there was a lot more we needed to see there. And then, like you said, we see the adult version of him, and it's not Dick Van Dyke's best work.
No, it's not. I mean, and not only is it this semi-offensive gay stereotype, but it has no connection to the character, the child that we see earlier in the movie. And I mean, we're talking about the emotion of it. Like, if we want to get into that, Dick Van Dyke himself playing the son could give you something like, how does this son, who is now an adult, feel that his father, who was a famous movie star, like basically neglected him? And there's nothing. He just shows up and he's like, oh, hey, I thought I'd say hi. I've been working over here at this fashion show. All right, see you later. Like, what is that?
Yeah, it's a miss is what that is, Josh.
Yeah.
Swing and a miss.
It is. And it almost makes you feel like Dick Van Dyke was just trying to find a moment where he could either play opposite himself or play some sort of implied gay character or whatever, and this is what he came up with.
But Josh, I don't know, if that was if that was directed or if that was his idea. So I don't want to speak on that. But I do want to say, I mentioned that he's in the laundry detergent commercial, right?
Right.
And even that is hey, this dude was once like Mickey Rooney, one of the biggest stars in the world, right? And now his big break in this part of his life is doing a laundry detergent commercial. And he plays it as I'm back and this is great and everything. But he's not an idiot. He would have to know how this is not being a movie star anymore, right?
Right. And I think that's a missed opportunity because the way that's presented is actually pretty clever, right? He goes on the Steve Allen show, and the whole thing about that is that he put this ad in the newspaper, which I think may be something that Buster Keaton actually did in real life. That he's available for work, he's still around or whatever. Steve Allen sees it, has him on the show. And the whole point of his discussion with Steve Allen is hey, I'm still here. I'm still funny. Somebody hire me. And then we see him in the next scene where he's given this big speech and the guy, this who looks like some sort of studio executive is saying, oh, we saw him on the Steve Allen show and we know we had to have him and we're going to put him back where he belongs on film. And he gives that speech, like you said, he's back. And then we realize it's a detergent commercial. And then nothing, right? No response. Is he sad? How does he, what's the disconnect between his celebrating being back and the fact that it's just a commercial, or even just for his career? Did he do more commercials? What else happened? And we just leave it alone.
Well, I think that's the recurring theme, right? We're getting little sketches of what could have been, but nothing goes deep enough to make us feel anything. And then we get the one deep scene and it's too late in the game. I mean, dude, there's that whole Mexican wedding sequence and that didn't really make much sense to me either.
Yeah, there are two sequences in this movie where he randomly gets married to some lady. And I feel like neither of those made much sense. The Mexican one where this is when he's a bit younger and he gets drunk and he's gotten divorced from Mary or is about to get divorced or whatever. And he meets this lady who's also drunk and also getting divorced. And then they get married. And I didn't understand, were they married? Because then he just drives back to LA and we never see her again. And I thought there would be some consequence of that or whatever. Or he's supposed to be so famous, it would have been a scandal or something, but nothing at all from that.
Yeah. Dave, why did you love this movie so much?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, all those, I like how you put it, Jason, that, they're like sketches and they don't really add up to much, but I liked each of those sketches. I thought that they were, enjoyable. And there were moments throughout them that made me laugh. And I like the intention of the whole thing. The idea of this guy who, makes everybody so happy with his comedy, but is just a mess. I like the idea of it, but in a lot of the ways that both of you have been kind of laying out here, it just doesn't all come together.
Yeah.
Hey, Dave, I just wanted to ask, have you ever done any music for a silent movie, whether it's a short or anything? That would be really fun, I think.
No. Well, I mean, Rick Thunder is kind of silent, right?
No, there's
Thunder had a lot of dialogue.
Okay, yeah.
It's a noir.
We wrote that dialogue,
Yeah.
Dave. It took a lot of effort.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a noir, award-winning noir Rick Thunder, Dave.
It's late.
Didn't you win an award for that?
We're recording this late. I can't remember.
I feel like he won an award for it.
He probably did.
That's a short, for anyone who doesn't know, that's a short film we all did a while ago.
Yeah.
That Dave doesn't remember, apparently.
But what I was going to say, Dave, is that I agree with you that I like the idea of a movie like that about this person who is, beloved, right? Like he says, he makes the world laugh. Everyone finds him so funny and lovable, but his life is a mess. And the way that these things often happen in real life. But one thing I was talking about with Jason after we watched this is that I feel like it's hard to make a serious movie about a funny person.
Yeah.
That
Absolutely.
Either you end up with the serious stuff you can't take seriously and it's too jokey, or it's an effective, it's a heavy drama. And then when you show the person and they're supposed to be funny, in world funny, no one is laughing. It's not funny. And I think it's really a difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
My counterpoints were 1, Chaplin with Robert Downey Jr. and 2, Lenny with Dustin Hoffman were 2 great movies where they made serious movies about funny people, but the funny stuff still is funny.
Yeah, I haven't seen Chaplin. I have seen Lenny, and I think it's very good. But I mean, I think part of the thing with that is that Lenny Bruce's stand-up is very
it's
specifically of the
its
time. Yeah.
Right, of course.
I feel like silent slapstick is easier to appreciate right now than like in 2024 than stand-up comedy of Lenny Bruce is.
Well, you can always punch someone in the balls or hit them in the face with a pie or pull their chair out, right, Josh?
You can, and that's what they do at Billy Bright's funeral, right? The serious guy from the Motion Picture Association gets a pie in his face.
That's the best scene in the movie, by the way. I was like, this movie has got to lose me, otherwise I'm going to really like this thing. But then it kind of lost me. But
yeah, and it did. It succeeded in losing you.
Yeah.
So should we give this a rating out of 5 pies in the face, maybe?
Sure. 5 pie faces, Josh. I gave it 2.5, which I think is generous, but I'm going to stick with 2.5 because I like the physical comedy and Mickey Rooney.
Yeah, and I like that stuff too. I only gave it 2 because I just really feel like it's
probably the right.
It's such a mess, and I do, the stuff that I liked, I really did like. Again, all the silent film pastiche stuff I thought was really fun, and you can tell how good Dick Van Dyke is at it and how much affection he has for it, but it's poorly integrated and everything else just doesn't work. So big miss for me, 2 out of 5 pies in the face. Dave, how do you rate this?
I'm going to 3, but that's being generous for sure. But there's enough here that I enjoyed that I can't really go
3.
lower.
You gave it 3.5 on Letterboxd. Don't run from your true self.
No, I gave it 3 on Letterboxd.
I know. Okay. I think Dave's right, Jason.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's probably right.
Don't insinuate extra halves of stars on me, Jason.
Come on.
Dave's generous with the stars when he wants.
He is, but I feel like in this case he was generous with them, but not as generous as you thought.
Yeah.
So we'll come back in a moment and talk about the legacy of the comic. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1969, we are talking about the comic, the flop of 1969. And although it is a huge flop, as we said, all the people involved are huge successes. I mean, 3 of these people who had some of the longest, most successful careers in Hollywood history, really.
Yeah, Carl Reiner, really, I mean, you think of him and he's synonymous with Mel Brooks because of, their Show of Shows and the 2,000-Year-Old Man and all that stuff. But he's also synonymous with Steve Martin, the jerk. He directed that. He directed Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, The Man with Two Brains, All of Me. And he wrote more than 24 books. He's got, a famous voice actor, a famous actor from the Ocean's 11 series, created the Dick Van Dyke Show. So the guy pretty much did it all.
He did. And I mean, even though this was a miss, his directorial career was quite successful for a period of time. As you said, those collaborations with Steve Martin and a bunch of mainstream comedies like Oh God with George Burns and Summer Rental and Summer School and Dave's favorite movie, Fatal Instinct.
Hell yeah.
So, Dave, I think you rewatched Fatal Instinct for this. That's what you did this week?
I sure did. Yeah, it was my first time in like 20-something years. That was literally one of my favorite movies when it first came out. And it held up. It's so stupid, but I was dying the whole time.
Yeah, I know you love those spoof movies.
Mm-hmm.
And it's weird because I think I saw on Letterboxd that you watched that. And I just thought, oh, Dave loves dumb spoof movies. And I didn't even realize it was a Carl Reiner movie.
I didn't either. That's why I watched it. I was like, when I saw it show up in his list, I was like, oh, no way, that's him. And so, I was like, I got to do some homework today.
Yeah. I mean, he did a lot of, they were all comedies, but a lot of different types of comedies, I'd say.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think that is the thing, is that he, worked in this very like 80s mainstream area, but he could also be in those Oceans movies and do voices on animated shows and guest spots on sitcoms and all this stuff. He won 11 Emmys. And his last appearance is, I will plug again, I think I mentioned in our Princess Bride episode, but the Jason Reitman Quibi remake of The Princess Bride, which I think is quite good, and ends with Carl Reiner and Rob Reiner as the son and the grandson and the grandfather, and that was the last thing that Carl Reiner did before he died, and it's quite nice.
I love that. I watched that. Was it a documentary? There were so many documentaries on like Mel Brooks. Wasn't there a documentary just about him and Carl Reiner a few years ago and how they just sit and have dinner every night and watch TV together? That was really nice.
Yeah, and there was also a documentary. I forget what it's called, but it's something like if you're not in the obituary, Eat Breakfast or something, that was a whole documentary about performers in their like 90s or whatever at the time who were alive. And both Carl Reiner and Dick Van Dyke are in that movie, in that documentary, as well as Mel Brooks.
And that might have been what I was thinking. I don't know. I've watched a lot of the Mel Brooks movies. So
yeah, I mean, there might be more than one, but certainly their friendship, legendary. And Dick Van Dyke, also a legend. He is still alive at 98 years old, just won an Emmy for guest starring on Days of Our Lives at age 98.
Love that. Yeah, how great is that? How great is that? You know, he's got a Tony for Bye Bye Birdie, 6 Emmys altogether, the Dick Van Dyke Show. Diagnosis Murder, Josh, that was a big hit. Remember that one?
I do, yeah. And I mean, he did other sitcoms. I mean, he had the new Dick Van Dyke Show and the Van Dyke Show and, trying to kind of recapture that. But Diagnosis Murder was a huge hit. He's in the Night at the Museum movies, which also feature Mickey Rooney. He also competed on The Masked Singer recently. I mean, The Masked Singer is terrible, but you gotta admire a guy who at 97 is like, yeah, I'm going to go on this dumb reality show and wear a ridiculous costume because you know what? It's fun. And I want to get out of the house.
Yeah, he's still living it up, right? And like I said, I mean, when it comes to physical comedy, he's got to be one of the probably 5 best of all time, I'd say.
Yeah, and I think it's great that 98-year-old Dick Van Dyke, I think, probably looks better than old, aged up Billy Bright in this movie in 1969.
Yeah, I hope he gets to 100, but I'm just glad he's still out there. So, Josh, Mickey Rooney, like we said, one of the biggest stars ever. I don't know if he gets the credit he deserves. Like I said, every bit of research I read on him was everyone talking about what a master of his craft he was, right? So he made more than 300 movies. The Andy Hardy series was a huge deal. And then, like you said, he's reinvented himself many times. He won a Golden Globe and an Emmy for Bill, and he's got an honorary Academy Award. I think he's got a bunch of Oscar nominations, The Bold and the Brave, Black Stallion, and then also he's got Tony nod for Sugar Babies.
Yeah, I mean, and just so many different things. And like those 2 Oscar nominations, one of those is from the 50s and one is from the 70s. I mean, like 20 plus years apart, he was nominated for Best Supporting Actor. He worked all the way until the late 2010s. Again, he was in the Night at the Museum movies along with Dick Van Dyke. He was in Babe Pig in the City and The Muppets. I mean, it's insane. And maybe he doesn't get credit as much because he did reinvent himself and because a lot of the stuff that he did was admittedly not highbrow or whatever. I mean, people remember him like for his extremely racist role in Breakfast at Tiffany's, which I still think is a great movie, but his part is not what you want to see in any movie.
Right. So not talk about stuff of the time, but I'm not going to defend that, but I do want to defend, like you're saying, maybe not everything was a hit. Obviously he made 300 movies, but again, remember he grew up in the Depression, right? That's a different generation where it's like, hey, I got to work no matter what. And this dude is the epitome of that. Right. So he made the most of everything that he could. So I just think he's a pretty fascinating, actor. We talked about Babes in Arms when we were talking about Judy Garland, I think, and I think Mickey Rooney won like one of those a juvenile Academy Juvenile Award. I don't know, one of those special Oscars.
Oh yeah, I love those. The ones that were half the size of the regular Academy Award that we talked about.
Yeah,
and yeah, he did a bunch of stuff with Judy Garland. They were regular collaborators, back then in the 30s, I believe. So I mean. Right. To go all the way from that to being in, B movies in 2014 or something is just absolutely astounding.
And like you said, I mean, Requiem for a Heavyweight, Pete's Dragon, like he was in a lot of big hits throughout all the years.
He absolutely was. So Michele Lee, not as much, but we
talked about her already. Do you remember when?
I don't actually. I looked up stuff about her and I forgot. When did we talk about her?
1967, How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying.
Oh, your favorite movie. Yeah. So she did do that. And I guess, she was a success from that. But this was her last film role, I think, for like 30 plus years. But she was huge in her TV work. She was on 14 seasons of Knots Landing, which was a major hit nighttime soap. And she also did a lot of Broadway work. Most recently in 2015. She was in Wicked. And so, she had a solid career, but nothing compared to these legends that were, that she was working with here.
Josh, do you remember her in Along Came Polly?
I don't, but I do remember that movie. Doesn't that involve Ben Stiller shitting his pants in that movie?
I forget. Is that the one with Philip Seymour Hoffman playing basketball?
Maybe Philip.
Yeah,
Somebody shit their pants.
I mean, I think I remember Ben Stiller having an erection and peeing all over the place, and then also the Philip Seymour Hoffman scene where he's like talking trash at basketball and just missing wildly. That's a great scene.
Yeah, that's not a good movie, but good for Michele for working. So I did start thinking about like these kind of silent film pastiches that...
one sec. We just got to say Steve Allen, first host of The Tonight Show, huge TV guy, Phil Silver show, composed more than 8,500 songs, has a Grammy, all-time legend.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously he was hugely famous. I mean, that's why he's doing this cameo as himself as the host of The Tonight Show. I mean, they don't say The Tonight Show here, but obviously is what it's meant to be. It's like when Jay Leno would do a lot of cameos in movies and do a monologue joke about the plot of the movie. He was real big on it.
Yeah, but he does have one show that I want to look up called Meeting of Minds, a series of historical dramas presented in a talk format. That sounds fun.
That Steve Allen hosted?
Yeah, I think wrote, produced, and hosted.
Yeah, good for him. Yeah, I don't know that I know a lot about Steve Allen. I'm not sure that I've seen him other than
well, that's why I had to interrupt you, Josh.
Right. No, that's fine. So I do know.
I'm glad you're bringing up these kind of like silent movies that we've seen maybe of the last 30, 40 years. Not too many of them. I mean, The Artist won Best Picture, right? That's probably the most famous. The one I wanted to bring up was Charles Lane's Sidewalk Stories, which is all-time 1980s like indie classic, I'd say.
And that's
it's really an interesting movie. Yeah, it's a silent movie, and it's kind of his homage to the kid. And it's the 80s. He was coming up at the same time as Spike Lee, and of course, since they're both black and they're both filmmakers, you had to compare them because it was the 80s, right? But he was interesting. That's worth watching. That's a cool movie.
Yeah, I'd like to check that out. I mean, I noted down The Artist, of course. I mean, that's one that people know. Blanca Nieves, which is from the director of Robot Dreams, which is, I mean, it's not like in the style of 1920s movies, but is also a dialogue-free movie that's out right now. But Blanca Nieves is a live action, very much in that style. It's a retelling of the Snow White story, and it's not a comedy, but it's really effectively done. I remember really liking that. But more so than Robot Dreams in terms of current movies, I feel like Hundreds of Beavers really captures that sense. I know, Dave, you're a fan of that one.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The only movie that crossed over both of our top 10 lists at the mid-year of piecing it together, me and Josh.
Yeah, I mean, and I think I do enjoy that style of film, and if someone does a good job of recreating it, it'll get my attention now. And I mean, obviously people love that movie, and as well they should, but that for me was
it's on Hoopla.
You should watch it, Jason.
I'm gonna watch it, Josh.
All right.
I'm gonna watch it with my daughter. I almost watched it the other day, but I thought that would be a fun one for us to watch together.
Yeah, that is perfect, actually. So any other things you want to say about the legacy of this film, Jason?
I think we've pretty much covered it. I mean, look, if you don't want to watch this movie, that's okay, but go look up some of the other stuff that all these legends did.
Yeah, you don't need to watch this movie, really. Or see if you can find, I don't know if there's like a YouTube clip of that one segment, of all the silent film clips, and watch that, and that's all you really need.
Josh, don't discourage the awesome movie or completists. You watch away.
Okay, yes, please do.
And tag it Awesome Movie here on Letterboxd.
You are correct. So that is the comic, and that's this episode of Awesome Movie Year. Check us out online and on social media where we are not silent.
No, but sometimes we are on Instagram, like forever. Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram. Awesome Movie Pod on a platform that I wish would go silent, but instead does the exact opposite. And then, of course, awesomemovieyear.com. I'm Jason Harris Comedy, or Jay Harris Comedy on all the socials. Eat This Comedy. We're doing shows. We're eating dinners. Come see some of those. And go for Jason on Letterboxd.
You can find some old stuff from me at joshbellhateseverything.com. I am at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, at Signal Bleed on that unfortunate ex-Twitter platform, as well as on Blue Sky and on Letterboxd. And if you're on Letterboxd and you watch this movie or any of the movies we talk about on the show, tag your review Awesome Movie Year. We would love to know what you think about any of the movies that we cover. And you can listen
Shout out to our boy or girl, You're a Blur.
Yes, You're a Blur. Thank you. I just noticed another You're a Blur review the other day. So we do very much appreciate that. join in the fun with You're a Blur and tag your reviews on Letterboxd Awesome Movie Year. And listen to our producer David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media at PiecingPod. And I spectacularly failed Jason's question earlier about whether I did any music for any silent films. I will shout out my YouTube channel, Music by David Rosen, where a lot of my music videos are essentially written as silent films for me to score. So that should have been my answer, yes.
Yeah, good answer, Dave.
And I'll shout out Dave, taking over the Las Vegas live movie scene, goes to movies, runs the Piecing It Together podcast. You're basically doing 2 of these a month right now. So go check out a live Piecing It Together.
Yeah, they're always, I'm sure whenever this comes out, there will be another one coming up, right, Dave?
That's why.
Thank you, guys.
So,
Doesn't
Jason,
matter when.
what do we have in our next episode?
Josh, we're going to Cannes. It's a movie called If. It won the Cannes Film Festival.
So
we're going to cover it.
Tune in next.
Because we always cover the winner of the Cannes Film
Jason
Festival.
hyping it up there. Excellent
Except when
job.
we don't. Sometimes we don't. We cover just a different movie from it. But this time we're covering the Palme d'Or winner, Josh.
Tune in next time.
Of the Cannes Film Festival.
If.
1969.
Thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.